Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.
Good evening. The Idaho State Board of Education today officially adopted a controversial report from a team of outside consultants, a report that recommends some significant changes in higher education in Idaho. Among other things, the report contemplates some major changes for the financially plagued pharmacy school at Idaho State University in Pocatello. The report, which was first made public last month, has sparked sharp reaction in southeastern Idaho, where many people already believe the Pocatello school is receiving a raw deal at the hands of the State Board of Education. The most recent reaction, a call earlier this week for the resignation from a prominent official, resignation of the State Board's Executive Director, Dr. Charles McQuillan. That call for resignation came from a prominent Pocatello attorney and an official in the Idaho State University Foundation. McQuillan was accused, among other things, of attempting to divide the state's institutions and to make himself chancellor of a statewide higher education system. Tonight, we'll be looking again into this brewing controversy with the man who headed up the team that produced the report that's been stirring up all the dust. We'll talk also with the president of the State Board of Education and with a Pocatello legislator who serves on the legislature's budget committee. The review team that produced the report that was received today was charged officially with examining the health science, engineering, and graduate programs at Idaho's higher education facilities. The team was headed by Dr. Frank Dickey, a former president of the University of Kentucky.
And there is no individual or institution that is so perfect that it is not subject to criticism. That is, unless one happens to be singing that great old song, "Oh Lord, it's hard to be humble when I'm perfect in every way."
That disclaimer aside, criticism of the report Dickey discussed today has been particularly strong in southeastern Idaho, where many people apparently view the recommendations as being anti-ISU.
Of course, some of these differences of opinion stem from a certain amount of defensiveness. At first hearing of some of the comments about the report, we as team members almost became equally defensive and somewhat contentious, perhaps. However, upon reflection, I realized that if I were in someone else's shoes, I too would wish to defend what might be looked upon as my domain or my offspring. In fact, if I were the chief executive officer of an institution here, I would be most apprehensive if my deans, department chairpersons, and faculty did not exhibit a bit of defensiveness.
The future of Idaho State University has clearly become a major community and political issue in the Pocatello area. Many southeastern Idaho legislators and legislative candidates were in this audience today. But at least one Pocatello legislator seemed relieved by what he had heard.
Well, I'm much more encouraged than I have been up to this time. I think we had a lot of misinformation on what the report really said. And from the report from Dr. Dickey, I'm sure that Idaho State is being seriously considered to advance and promote and to become a much better university than what it is now.
I do think that if you would look at the enrollments in the school, that you will find that Idaho State has been perhaps getting more than their fair share of the education dollars in this state for the number of students they were educating. And I think that this probably is the first time that they've come to cope with reality and realize that those dollars should go with the students, and that is not a politically popular opinion in Pocatello. It's called Portnoy paranoia.
Meanwhile, the board's executive director, Dr. Charles McQuillan, wasn't saying much of anything today about the report or about the call for his resignation. But board members were defending McQuillan.
I think people are frustrated here. I think they are very frustrated. They want better education, and so I think people are kind of zeroing in on one person, and I don't think it's that simple. If there were simple answers, which there never are, then you could say, oh yes, let's blame this on to Charlie McQuillan, but it's not Charlie McQuillan's fault.
That's a case that anyone in the room that has done its part for Idaho State, they can stand up and throw rocks at Dr. McQuillan. But if you haven't done your part, why then you have to stand with him and accept some of the responsibility, which I think says the university has to accept some, the alumni and the community, the Board of Education, the legislature. It might have been Milt Small 2 years ago. The crisis is here, and McQuillan happens to be the man in the position. But we all have to bear some of the responsibility. And getting rid of Charlie McQuillan does not solve a problem at ISU. I think it was an improper statement made by a gentleman that should have known better.
I neglected to point out, of course, that the State Board is meeting today and tomorrow on the campus of Idaho State University in Pocatello. We continue our look now at this higher education story with Dr. Frank Dickey. He is the former University of Kentucky president who was hired by the State Board to examine health, engineering, and graduate programs in Idaho, and Dr. Dickey joins us tonight in Pocatello. Dr. Dickey, you said there on the videotape that there was some misunderstanding about your report and exactly what you were trying to do. Could you elaborate on that a bit more, please?
Yes, I think that perhaps one of the most basic misunderstandings has been that people have said this is a pharmacy report. In reality, that is only one phase of the report. It's only one of the several problems that seems to be confronting the State Board of Education in Idaho and the legislature. And certainly the report says that there are a number of areas that need additional support, need further study, and one would hope that there are decisions that the State Board would make based on this report, this review, would bring about improvement in the educational programs for the state.
I appreciate what you're saying, but in the community where you sit tonight, there is a strong feeling among a lot of people, apparently, that the report comes out giving ISU the negative end, the bad end of the stick. Comment on that.
I would merely say that if that's the interpretation, I think it's an erroneous one, in that other institutions were reviewed. The suggestions and recommendations pertain to other areas as well as to ISU, and in reality, the programs at ISU came in for their share of praise as well as some of the criticisms.
Let me just for a moment look at this pharmacy school situation, because it has been so much in the news here, as you well know. The school basically is facing a loss of accreditation and facing a major need for infusion of money to upgrade faculty salaries, among other things. You made 3 different recommendations in your report to the board, one of which was to phase out the school and go to some cooperative arrangement to educate pharmacy students in other states. But I think I heard you say today that that's not necessarily the preferred alternative.
It is only one of the 3 alternatives, and obviously if funds are available to strengthen and to improve the program and to bring it back into a condition where it would be fully accreditable, then I think one would always say that the preference would be to let it remain right here as it stands with the improved situation. The other 2 alternatives were listed only because there were some assumptions that the resources of the state were not sufficient to enable the needed improvements to be made.
But the thrust of your recommendation, not only on the pharmacy area but across the board, was that if the programs are going to exist, they have to be quality programs that can be accredited.
That is correct, and it's particularly true in pharmacy, because if the program is not accredited, then the individuals who graduate from that institution and that program are not eligible for sitting for licensure. So it would be foolhardy for anyone to attend a program that is not fully accredited.
But again, I think you emphasized to the board today that whatever is done with the pharmacy school should not detract from other programs somewhere else.
That is true. It seems unfair to take it out of the hide of other programs and put them in jeopardy just to save one. So it's going to necessitate an increase in funds or the adoption of one of the other alternatives that has been listed to have cooperative programs for students outside the state.
Dr. Dickey, as you know, the last segment of your report was not made public. The last section dealing with governance issues. It was made public because we were able to obtain a copy of it, and we talked about it on this program about a month ago. You did not respond to any questions today or did not discuss that before the board. Was that by design?
I responded to questions from some of the legislators in a session later on. And the situation is essentially this. As the review teams made their studies of the three programs in engineering and health sciences and graduate programs, we found that some of the problems were not necessarily just institutional problems, but were involved in relationships between the board and the staff and the institutions, and as a consequence, some of the comments that were made in the draft form were ones dealing with governance. After the draft form had been sent for comment, and I assume that that is the form in which you saw it, the draft form and not any final form, the comments were made to remind the review team that governance really was not one of the charges given to the team for making a report on.
Well, let me just interrupt you right there, though, because one of the themes that runs through all of your report, not just the part that was not made public, is a talk about a lack of cooperation among the institutions. There's some call for a better system of keeping track of what one institution is doing as opposed to the next. That relates directly to some of the concerns that you've talked about. The pharmacy school, just one of many. Does it not?
To a degree, but I remind you that this was not a part of the charge, and as a consequence, the final report did not include the section on governance, and the final report consisted of the three elements of the engineering section, the health sciences section, and the graduate programs. The draft of the section on governance was revised to some extent and was sent in revised form to a few individuals, but was not and will not be, unless the board so directs, will not be presented to the board for any consideration.
And just in a word, I guess that's okay with you.
That is okay.
Okay, we'll come back, sir. Thank you. Let's turn now to another view of this, and that comes tonight from Clint Hoops, the president of the State Board of Education. Mr. Hoops is from Teutonia. He's also joining us tonight in Pocatello. Mr. Hoops, is this an anti-ISU report?
Mark, I wouldn't believe that was an anti-ISU report. I do believe that ISU happened to be a school that has two of the programs studied, engineering and health science, which included pharmacy. We chose these three things because we felt we had some serious problems in them. Both of them are rated as high-cost programs. And consequently, it looks like maybe it came down heavy on ISU simply because they had these two programs.
Well, you know, I'm sure after having been through your meeting there today that a lot of folks in Pocatello and the area are really concerned about this and about what they perceive as the state board's attitude toward ISU.
Mark, I'm extremely pleased that they're concerned about it. And I guess this is part of the job, if they misconceive, which I think they do, our attitude towards ISU. I think a lot of us recognized that we had problems in the state, and it just seemed like nothing could be done. Maybe the board didn't present these problems right. And this is the reason we chose these three subject areas, to have some outside consultants come in. Maybe we were too close to it. And we asked them to please tell it like it was. And sometimes when we hear the situation that it is, in the long run, someone comes out better. And I honestly feel this is probably going to be the case with ISU.
You, on the videotape you heard a moment ago, two of your fellow board members rather strongly defending Dr. McQuillan. I assume that you're in the same position.
I guess I have to be because we've went through a process of selecting Dr. McQuillan at the time Milt Small left. We set up a job description, which certainly wasn't a chancellor, and I know that the majority of the board do not believe in it. This job description was stronger than Milt Small's, and it was simply so that our office could handle some of the materials that a lay board needs. And that position had to be so that we were able to obtain those in a statewide manner.
So these calls for his resignation are, and blaming him for whatever perceived attitude that the state board might have toward ISU, they're misplaced.
I'm certainly feel they're misplaced, and certainly some of the accusations about Mr. McQuillan wanting to be chancellor, he has never asked that, and in fact he recommended that in our annual review this year, we had 3 new board members since the time we hired him, that we go through these 18, I think it's approximately 18 points in the job description, and there was about 5 that were maybe wondered whether they agreed. We as a board said we need this in an executive secretary, and we think the job description as it now stands is what we need to function as a board.
Okay. Let me just interrupt you there and ask you for a quick comment, and then we'll come back to some of these points. A quick comment on the quality of this report that Dr. Dickey presented to you today. I said you received it, I think or accepted it. More correctly, the word should be you received it, which implies, I guess, that you're not obviously endorsing all that is said here. What do you, just in general, what do you think of this report?
I think the report in general was exceptional. And especially when I see the reaction in the state about, from the people of the state, saying we must do something about education, and I'm really feeling good about that. So I can say the majority of the report is right if you take the assumption that Dr. Dickey and the team did, that maybe we're not going to fare any better than we have the last 6 years. Then there's some things that we need to do. We can't keep cannibalizing each other from one institution to another or from one program to another. The basic fact is we just haven't had totally enough resources.
Well, we'll come back, sir. Thank you. Our final guest tonight, also in Pocatello, is State Representative Larry Echohawk, a Democrat and a member of the House Appropriations Committee, one of the 2 committees of the legislature that determines how much money is going to be spent on higher education. Mr. Echohawk, I'm going to ask you for a comment, generally speaking, for your constituents and maybe other members of the legislature from the Pocatello area. How did you feel after what you heard today and after having a chance to hear what Dr. Dickey and Mr. Hoops have just said here?
Well, I think that we're, in our community, starting to face reality and realizing that the result of low funding over the past several years has brought us to the point now where we're starting to pay the price, and that is to see our quality of education in Idaho, and particularly at Idaho State University, being questioned, and having talk about program cuts and reduction in what we can offer the citizens in Idaho.
You heard Mrs. Bilyeu, a member of the board, say a few moments ago on videotape that people were just really frustrated. Is that a good word to describe how people feel about this situation?
I think so. We're frustrated here because we have a strong delegation of representatives here that have vigorously supported Idaho State University, but it seems like where we've suffered in our community is overall with the higher education appropriation being quite a bit less than what the state board is recommending, legislature being unwilling to appropriate an adequate level. Secondly, Idaho State University has been treated, I think, unfairly through the formula funding process.
That's the formula that divides up, in essence, divides up all of the higher education money among the 4 institutions.
That's right. It's not the function of the legislature to divide the money. The legislature appropriates that. It's the state board's responsibility to divide the money, and the formula, as it's known, has been used to make that decision.
And who's responsible for that, the state board or Dr. McQuillan ultimately?
Well, I think ultimately it's the state board. I think Dr. McQuillan had quite a bit of hand in developing the formula. But I don't think that in criticizing Dr. McQuillan, we ought to lose sight to what the real problem is, and that is the adequacy of funding statewide for higher education. The state board comes in and asks for, $84 million, and the legislature appropriates $4 to $5 million less. We're just not doing the job in the legislature that we need to be doing.
Well, let me ask you, why were so many members of the legislature there today? We had, by one count, I think 25 different members, fully a quarter of the members of the legislature were in that room today.
Well, Mark, I think that higher education is starting to take on a more major status of an issue. In the last session, public education was in the forefront, and I think that people are realizing that higher education is quite important too, and that the legislature in funding higher education hasn't done justice in the past few years. So I think that this coming session, it will be the major issue.
Let me ask you finally, Mr. Echohawk, and then we'll open this up. What would you specifically like to see done now with the major problem that's received so much attention right now, and that's the pharmacy school at ISU? What should be done there?
Well, I think that the pharmacy school should definitely be maintained. I would personally like to see, through the Permanent Building Fund, a new facility built through state money, and have a new program developed to make them not only what they've been in the past, but actually open it up beyond that to attract other people into the state. As Idaho participates in some of the regional programs, I think that we ought to make Idaho State University's pharmacy program a regional program that attracts outsiders.
Okay, well, on that point, let's open it up, and let me go back to Mr. Hoops for a comment on that. I know the board is in the process of weighing what should be done with the pharmacy school. Do you have some preliminary notion of that tonight?
Mark, I could say that in all fairness, we will weigh every alternative. But we must not forget the added benefits, even though it might be cost-saving to take one of the first two options. There's enough added benefits to Idaho State University when we've declared it the Center for Health Science that we must look very close at the fringe benefits. And I have the feeling that we have support from the rest of the state, even in this endeavor, if we recognize that not only in engineering and health science that maybe pharmacy is most visible, but I could cite examples of things that are very close, accreditation problems, to pharmacy in our other institutions of the state. So as I said before, and as Representative Echohart said, it's our total resources that is the problem of this. It may be we can patch it over one more year, but that isn't a permanent solution.
Can you do it as Dr. Dickey suggests you must by not taking away from some other program, even on a one-year basis?
That's something the board will just have to weigh. And I say that because we have been doing that now for 4 or 5 years. The percentage for higher education of the general fund budget since 1978 has dropped from 19 point something to 14.5. If we had that 19 point something percent of the general fund this year, we could fund all our requests for higher education in Idaho.
Mr. Echohawk, I guess you would agree with that.
Yes, Mark, as I said, I think the real problem is in the legislature with the appropriation level. The formula, no matter how much criticism it receives, is really aimed at an adequate appropriation level. I don't think you'd hear all the criticism about the formula if the legislature was doing its job in appropriating money for higher education.
Dr. Dickey, finally, let me go back to you. We've heard some discussion here of a chancellor, or at least the need, and your governance, the governance section of your report talks about the need to make the state board stronger and the executive director stronger. Do we need to move toward a chancellor system in Idaho, in your opinion?
That's a decision that the board has to make. There are states comparable to Idaho in size and complexity and with a number of institutions that have chancellors. There are other states that have no centralized state system at all. There are others that have modifications that would approximate this one, and it's an individual state proposition that has to be the decision of the board.
So there's not any formula that one can plug into these situations and say a chancellor would work well with 4 institutions and 1 million population?
Not necessarily any formula at all on that. It depends entirely upon the situation and the terrain, as the old Army saying goes. When people ask questions, everything depends on the situation and the terrain, and in this case it does, because every state is different, personalities are different, institutions are different, and the heritage and the background of the state and the institutions might mean that a chancellor system would never work here.
Am I right, though, when I say that you believe and the members of your committee believe that Idaho needs better coordination among its institutions?
It needs more cooperation, let's put it that way. I'm not sure that coordination is necessarily the best word. I think that the geographic distances between the institutions makes for a very difficult situation, and one that does not always promote full cooperation. And it would be our hope that the future would bring forth more cooperative programs so that new programs would not have to be established in each of the institutions, but rather they could deal with each other on a cooperative basis.
Let me just get a quick comment on that point from Mr. Hoops first, and then Representative Echohawk. Mr. Hoops?
Yes, I would like to comment on that very much, because in any national meeting, a lot of people have said how lucky we are to have one state board who can not only govern, but cooperate and work. And I do think that this is the ideal situation, even though we are all lay people from different walks of life. I think the one thing that we do need is the strengthening of that small 10.5 office to not to govern, but to bring information to the members so that maybe they can.
Okay. Mr. Echohawk, more cooperation, coordination, Chancellor, any of those things, or all of those things?
Well, Mark, I might say that it may be a rather inappropriate time to talk about the chancellorship idea when Dr. McQuillan has been under fire. I would say that I was impressed personally with the study that was done by the Idaho Association of Commerce and Industry, and I don't think that the legislature has really had a fair hearing on a variety of the points that were raised in that study. So I, for one, would keep an open mind on that question.
Which, among other things, that report recommended a tougher system of governance, better governance of the education system. Well, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to thank you all for taking time to be with us tonight. Dr. Dickey, thank you, sir. Mr. Hoops and Representative Echohawk, we appreciate it, gentlemen. That's our time for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night, with other news permitting, an interview with former Wisconsin Senator Gaylord Nelson. He's now chairman of the Wilderness Society. I'm Mark Johnson. Good night.
Funding for Idaho Reports is provided by the Friends of 4, 10, and 12, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by a grant from the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation.